Hello everyone. So it has now been exactly 1 year since I started doing digital art, truly. So for today's video, I'm going to be looking at my old art leading up to this point, and just talking about some of the milestones I made, and stuff like that. So hopefully I can get this video underneath 15 minutes, because it's a lot to cover. I made a lot of art in 1 year. So last year, and actually probably around this time of day last year, I made this thing. So these are the twins, a character from Terraria, and well, you can see some attempt at making some form shadows and really messed up perspective, but it's the first thing I made, so you can't really criticize it too much. But this is actually considerably better than what I'd make for the next 2 months or so. So yeah, that's that. So then, maybe a few weeks after I made that, I made this thing, this character based upon a Lego dragon I made. And I don't remember the anatomy of the Lego thing being this bad, but this one, which I used as a reference from the Lego thing, is certainly bad. It's it's absolutely horrific. So for the next few months, I would make things like this. Characters, if you can even call them that. Mostly cats, and I think that's actually the only cat. Dog things and dragons, maybe, with terrible anatomy. But eventually I started to learn a little bit of anatomy. I just kind of figured out, I guess, what they should look like, but still not really, because you can see this is still garbage. And so at the time I was just using FlipClip, which is an animation app, which never actually animated anything with it, but I'd been using that up until this point. So then I got Autodesk Sketchbook, which I actually had a bit of experience on the computer, never actually drawing anything except trying to animate a few scribbles here and there. But then I got it on my iPad, which is still what I use, and I discovered the airbrush. The airbrush was absolutely miraculous for me, even though anybody who knew what they were doing would tell you that an airbrush is not something you should use much ever. But anyway, this is a crab penguin. This is the kind of stuff I made back then. So after some time, I decided that I wanted to improve my art, so I did the natural thing and looked up some tips on rendering metal. It's not that natural, actually. That's a bad idea. I would go with something a little bit more simple. Metal's kind of complicated. I didn't really pay attention to the fact that reflections are important, and reflections are important to everything, but specifically metal. And it ended up with this, and it's not terrible, but it's definitely not good. I was proud of it at the time, though, and I made another red one. It's actually significantly worse, and this one got, a lot of views, so I figured that if I like this, and other people like this, I should continue drawing like this, which is, made this stuff using an airbrush. So that kind of started my whole, addiction to using an airbrush. Very, very bad habit. Don't suggest you do that. And it took quite a long time to break that habit. So here is another one of the things I made with an airbrush. I think I used a few other brushes, but mostly the airbrush. And it's actually the first time I made an environment kind of thing, and some terrible perspective, no attempt at composition, lighting just makes no sense. And here is another one. This one has lines, actually. So I think this is the last time I used lines. I just didn't really think you could render things well with them, which is not true, but at the time I didn't think that, and I don't think I'm going to go back to using them ever. But the airbrush and the lines is a terrible combination, but I was quite proud of it when I made it. Here is yet another environment, and yet another thing with way too much airbrush usage. I'm pretty sure I just use it for everything except for the clouds in the background. But yeah, I tried to go with some sort of perspective thing, but it's still awful. There's no attempt at lighting. The cast shadows don't make sense, and this also started an interesting trend where people would refer to my art as realistic. So, thanks for that, Invertica. At least that's how I assume you'd say your name. I don't know. At some point, I realized that my airbrush drawings were absolute garbage, and I tried to make this, so instead of rendering with an airbrush, I rendered with a particle effect brush, which is actually way worse. I didn't understand that's what it was for. I didn't understand much. But then I also kind of gave up on not using the airbrush and used the airbrush in a lot of places. So, yeah, this is just a mess. I remember I was really close to quitting art at this time, because my art was just terrible. That would have been a really smart thing to do at the time, but I kept going for some reason. After a fairly significant jump in time, I realized that stylistic rendering exists, and I made this thing. I promptly dismissed the idea of rendering stylistically, but yeah, it's a cool attempt to see what it would look like. So here you can see I redid an old piece, which you just saw a few minutes ago. Again, the perspective on the tubes is terrible, but I think I'd mostly broken the habit of using the airbrush. There isn't a whole lot of airbrushing going on. At least I don't think so. So that's an improvement at least. So here is where I kind of learned about color temperature, but not really. I learned the whole thing that if you have warm light, you'll have cool shadows, which makes sense because there very well could be a darkish blue sky behind this sunset thing here. But I would use this for everything, and it would ruin a lot of things I made, so don't follow that advice, please. But I started adding color to my shadows, which that's an improvement, so yeah. So here you can see a wolf with some somewhat messed up anatomy, but still, at the time I made it, I was pretty proud of it. But then I eventually realized that I couldn't make anything better than this. This was somehow I did something right, or I just got really lucky, but I couldn't replicate this in any of the other animals I drew, so I just felt like I was just drawing under this thing's shadow and trying to make something better, which never happened until sometime later, and I actually learned how the anatomy of wolves and other animals look, and how to draw fur too, which I'm still kind of learning. Here's something I need to redraw at some point. This thing, I got really lucky with the colors, they go well together. The design of the skyhook doesn't look that cool, but everything else is kind of neat. The mountains could use with some work though. Here's a thing that I called a spectator. So, when I posted this thing got a lot of views, and I had like maybe 300 or 400 subscribers back then, and not many of them really cared about my art, but when I posted this thing, they really did care about it, and I got a lot of compliments, despite the fact that this thing was garbage. Garbage was a word that defined my art for the next few weeks, until I made this texture study here, and, well, some of them are terrible, but the one in the bottom right, that's kinda cool. So I just kinda convinced everyone that I was good at art again. So, yeah, then I promptly disappoint them with the next few things I made. As you can see, I was very inconsistent back then. Sometimes I made things that were almost serviceable to look at, other times it just looked like a toddler made them. Here you can see I started to try to work on doing things a lot more painterly, and this turned out a lot faster than anything else I'd ever made up until that point. But it looked bad, so it would be a while until I tried the process again, which is still what I use today, but it was a start. This was a good time to learn that, because soon after I got Art Studio Pro, which is a much more painterly app. I mean, you can do line drawings and more structured things like what I did before, but I feel it's more accustomed to people who use like those very loose techniques of a painter. So here you can see a Terrorblade, also from Terraria. I've drawn a lot of Terraria things. I slowly started to try to get a grasp on the fundamentals of lighting and stuff like that. And here you can see, some rocks poking through the snow that looks like cookies and cream ice cream. That's the most disgusting kind of cookies and cream ice cream I see. This is just disgusting to look at. The story's cool, and I at least try to make reflections in the metal. Eventually I figured out that if I was going to be using a more painterly style, then I would have to worry about brushwork. And brushwork was something I was not good at, as you can see here. The glass looks horrendous. After I realized this, I tried using very highly textured brushes to cover up my bad brushwork, and usually things ended up like this, which, to be honest, I actually kind of like this thing. It looks pretty funny. So, as I mentioned earlier with the wolf thing, well, eventually I started looking at references and tried to understand what anatomy actually looked like. Ended up with this fox, and an attempt at fur, which it's not that bad, but I would get a little bit better eventually. So you might actually be starting to recognize some of these, because this is getting fairly recent. So for this one, while I was making it, I happened to be listening to a Devin Townsend podcast, which is a musician at the time I had recently discovered, and he was talking about my favorite album of his, Kai, or Key, I can't remember how it's pronounced. But anyway, he shared a very insightful advice for, well, for his case, making music, but it's kind of hard to explain, but it really helped me, and from then on my art would be marginally better. And I'll link that below if you want to hear the advice. It's kind of long, so you'll probably have to search for it, but it was worth listening for sure. So, as of November 6th, I made this thing, which is not a milestone or anything, it's just the most recent thing I made, and I don't think I've had any really interesting discoveries in between the last one and this one, but here we are. Hopefully I can do better next year from now, a year from now, which I'm sure I'll improve a lot more slowly, because that's just how things work, but, you know, can hope for the best. So, hope this wasn't too much of a bore to watch, but I enjoyed making it, so, yeah. So, if you did watch this far, which of course you're here, so you did, unless for some reason you skipped to the end. But anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks for being here. Love making this art, and love reading all your comments, so thanks for that.